thought you said 15 minutes. Yeah, it's so sad. I stopped looking at it.
Okay, I have to say 4 things. First thing, I don't know much about American politics. I'm still wondering why the organizers asked me to come and talk about this. Second thing, I mean, broadly, whatever I'm going to say is going to be divided into 3 parts. The first part, I'm going to talk about Trump's rhetoric, the trumped-up rhetoric. It's pathetic, it's despicable. You can use all manner of words for it. I mean, I don't think any word is sufficient to capture the meanness, the lowness, and how bad it can get. Secondly, I want to link this with democracy, because that's perhaps one of the reasons why the organizers may have asked me to come and talk. As someone who teaches political theory, there are many things about democracy that I would want to say today. Of course, I can't say everything, keeping in mind the constraints of time. Thirdly, I want to link this shock victory to the Brexit vote, because there are many similarities which I think are, calling out for our attention. So, I think basically that's broadly that's perhaps the major point that I would like to make. Perhaps I can say a little more about the Brexit thing to make sense of this. Firstly, I was watching President Obama last night. I was looking at the speech he delivered. I was looking at the grace, the elegance with which he would say things. The man has a way with words. I think the novelist Philip Roth said that there's a poetry in the way he speaks, which I think is true. Now, I hope I don't sound very overly kind of praising Obama, but I think one has to do it given the specimen that we now have. In comparison to the specimen that we now have, Obama is certainly an angel. I'm reminded of his many speeches. I mean, some of them have really stood out to me. For example, when he won, the speech where he, that famous speech when he said, "Yes, we can." It was inspirational, it was lyrical, it was poetic, it was uplifting, it was sublime. And look at what we have now. The speech that Obama gave when he addressed the Muslim world in Cairo, in University 2009, was again extremely sensitive. There was a way in which he drew from his own Muslim background, for which he was vilified and demonized. Remember the way he was called Barack Hussein Obama. Now, as I said, after George W. Bush, we thought that was a come down. Think of this. This is worse. And what really one wonders about is there worse to come? In the morning I was talking to my MA students and I was telling them a story about American presidents. Let me just tell the story once again for the benefit of other people. MA students, please bear with me. I can see lots of them. So I've got grades, thinking about the end of semester, so I better be there. There's a story about George Washington, the first American president, okay, when he was a little boy. And he cut down his father's cherry tree. His father got very angry and he demanded to know who is it who's cut down my cherry tree. Now everyone in the house, of course, was very worried about the patriarch getting very angry. And the story goes that young George Washington stepped forward bravely, courageously, honestly and said, "Father, I cannot tell a lie. It was me." Perhaps the moral of the story is that America began with a president who couldn't tell a lie. They now have a series of presidents who can't tell the truth. Donald Trump is all about the post-truth. I won't say anything about Obama. I have much more respect for him. George W. Bush lied about weapons of mass destruction. Bill Clinton, Hillary's husband, lied about many other things. Among them, we assume there were things about Monica Lewinsky that he said. Ronald Reagan lied about Iran-Contra. Nixon famously lied about Watergate. He looked into the camera and said, "I'm not a crook." That's one of the famous things he said. But I mean, there's a progressive degeneration in the kind of people that you get as American presidents, Obama being the sole exception in this regard. Now, if you analyze the way that this man speaks, I'm referring to, of course, Donald Trump, there's an incoherence in his sentences. The man is incapable of stringing together two coherent sentences in English, which I believe is his first language. The sheer demagoguery, the bile, the venom with which he comes up with is intimidating. It's intimidating if you're a Latino, it's intimidating if you're a black, it's intimidating if you're a Muslim. Okay, these are the targets. I often wonder at why some demagogues do all these things and get away with it. He's got away with it. The kind of thing that he said about women, it is, words and logic defy the way that he talks about women. Okay, the lurid details in which he's gone into about his sexual exploits. But yet he's got away with it. He's been rewarded with a remarkable victory. Now, I was reading recently a book. I've forgotten who the author is. If you want, I can perhaps give you the reference. But it's called Enough Said. I think it very well captures the many things that Obama has said. Sorry, not Obama, Trump has said. Now, the point that this book is making is that if you analyze his sentences, there's a remarkable missing element of conjunctions, those vital parts of speech which connect sentences. And I think he says something, he trails off in something else. So he famously says, I love Hindu, as if Hindu is a person or an entity. Famously he said this. He had very nice things to say about our man, Mr. Modi here, so it's all saying birds of a feather flock together. Anyway, I won't say too much about that. But broadly what this book was saying was, it used the term parataxis to talk about the way that demagogues speak. Demagoguery is now considered to be high oratory. I hope you get the indication that I'm trying to make. There was a time when this country, America I'm talking about, was famous for its famous public oratory. I have in my 1963 Martin Luther King Jr., the lyrical I Have a Dream. Okay, I'm talking about Obama, of course. And now look what you have. You have the bile, the venom of a demagogue. It's dangerous. Now, having made this particular point about the language of someone like Mr. Trump, let me move on to democracy. Because this is where I hold my own profession responsible for a self-congratulatory attitude towards democracy. This is a point that I was making yesterday when I was speaking at the Center for Political Strategy. Yes, many of you were there. My sense is that many of us, especially I'm holding political scientists within political science, political theory, which I teach and try to write about, as responsible for not being sufficiently critical of democracy. Mr. Trump is a product of the democratic process. He's come through the electoral route, and I think we need to understand this. Mr. Trump represents what I am trying to, encapsulate in the phrase, the incorrigibility of democracy. Okay? Famously, the Greek philosophers had this very condescending attitude towards democracy. They would say that it has a tendency to degenerate to mobocracy. Okay, Plato famously talked about it being unlovely, so did Aristotle. Okay, there was a certain kind of elitism, a certain aristocracy. Now that's not the way that I would want to attack democracy, but what I'm trying to suggest here is that there is an incorrigible element in democracy which makes democracy latch onto some of the basest elements in society, and by latching onto the basest elements in society, it gives it the respectability of a democratic mandate. That's exactly what has happened in the case of Trump. Okay, this aspect of incorrigibility is linked to the way in which there is a progressive degeneration in the quality of democratic discourse. Look at the way in which our own democratic discourse has plunged, it's taken nosedives. It has reached the abysmal level of the gutter. I mean, when you were at the Bihar election, something I kind of followed very closely. Election Commission of India, I think, passed 2 stretches about the level to which the language had followed, the name calling, the insinuations that were going on. Now, what I'm trying to do here is to suggest, of course, democracy is very important. We can perhaps pat ourselves on the back for being an oasis among the kind of in South Asia for the long periods of democracy, barring, of course, the emergency and the fact that we have peaceful transitions of power. But the point that I'm trying to make is fascism comes through the democratic route. Think of Hitler. Think of 1932. Think of the burning of the Reichstag, 27th February 1933. Okay, we only have to remind ourselves that it is through the democratic route that you arrive at this kind of a situation. Now, the reason why I'm trying to make some of these points is because I've been awfully depressing last night, as many of us have been. And all of this reminds me of the 1930s. If there is one historical signpost that we could perhaps use to understand where we're headed, it is perhaps the 1930s. We have reached a pretty dire situation. I am speaking on purpose with an impending sense of doom. Okay, I see the regimes around us as extremely dangerous regimes. These are regimes that are extremely dangerous for the very lifeblood of democracy itself. Of course, they claim to come through the democratic route. Our own Prime Minister famously bowed in front of the temple of democracy, but then doesn't kind of bother to attend too many sessions. The point that I'm making is that there's a strange irony in the coming of these regimes. They take the democratic path, fine. But then they can do two things to dissent, which I think is the vital lifeblood of democracy. They make dissent inane by two methods. Firstly, you can make dissent inane by suggesting that the people who are dissenting don't really matter. So JNU didn't matter until now. Until this regime came to power, JNU didn't matter because, the idea was that a bunch of left loonies basically saying whatever they want to in this lovely campus nestled with the Aravallis. So what happened in the dissent was that it kind of vaporized, it kind of evaporated. Okay, people basically letting off a bit of steam and that was it. Now the case is different. Dissent now seems to matter to this regime. And this regime will not allow it to evaporate, as it, dissent will not be allowed to evaporate in America for that matter, the USA. Dissent will now be brought down with the force of a sledgehammer. So, linked to the first point about the incorrigibility of democracy that I'm making a second point about which I'm referring to as the inanity of dissent. The inanity of dissent can take two forms. The first that I just referred to, and it doesn't really matter. Okay, people can say whatever they want to, and that's the end of the story. If you really want to understand the predicament of, let's say, a university like JNU, why it's going through the troubles that it is going through in the last 1 year, it needs to be understood in the form of the movement of, the attitude of one kind of dissent and now this new attitude towards dissent, the coming down with the force of a sledgehammer. Okay? Democracy's redemption, we will look for it. Right now, it's not in sight anywhere. Okay, I do believe, and this is where I perhaps offer a glimmer of optimism. I do believe that democracy will be able to redeem itself. When, how is another question which some of you perhaps need to think about. Okay, but as I said, we are living in dangerous times and they're about to get much worse. Okay, now having made those points about democracy, let me move on to the Brexit vote, which is, this is the way that I've been trying to understand it. Okay. Just let me perhaps for a few minutes dwell on the Brexit vote, because that was the other thing that took people by surprise. Okay, in much the same way that this shock election victory took many of us by surprise, the Brexit vote took people by surprise. Again, how much time do I have? 5 more minutes, okay. The Leave campaign, the campaign to leave the European Union, was based on a series of misinformation. The idea that £350 million could be saved if we exit the European Union. That money could then be diverted into the National Health Service, which I think has been undermined. I think one of the finest things that the British have done. They haven't done much after losing the Second World War or losing the Empire. Well, they won the Second World War, of course they lost the Empire. But for a second-rate power progressively degenerating to a third-rate power, one of the good things that they did was the National Health Service. The public provisioning of healthcare at the point of entry, as it's called. But then, this story that was being told to people, and people took this hook, line and sinker. Now, there was a fact checker that the BBC, too obsessed with it, the BBC had put forward. And voters could actually go and check whether the facts that were being put forward by the Leave and Remain campaigns were true or not. No one did it. Okay, it's strange that on such a serious issue about, the last referendum that was held about, Britain's membership of the European Union was held in 1975, I think. Okay? Largely the point is that a lot of people seem to vote on the basis of whim and caprice. Okay? Whatever they felt like on the morning. Right? Now, in this case, why am I bringing up the Brexit vote? The Brexit vote to leave the European Union was based on genuine discontent. The discontent was genuine. What was it? It emanated from people who felt they had lost out from globalization. It came from the north of England, the cradle that was, once the Industrial Revolution. Those parts of England that were systematically, deliberately deindustrialized during the Thatcher years by a certain Prime Minister called Mrs. Margaret Thatcher. The systematic deindustrialization, as I said, it was deliberate. It was not just deliberate, it was malicious. She broke down the trade unions, the famous miners' strike, 1984 to 1985. Okay? This is where the discontent is coming from. And as Professor Vijayalakshmi very rightly pointed out, the American Rust Belt was perhaps decisive. Okay? The jobs that had been lost there, the sheer misery, the hopelessness, the idea that globalization has not really proved to be of any benefit. So the larger point that I'm making is in exactly the same way that many people, especially in Northern England, lost out and felt that globalization was working against them, that the odds were stacked against their lives. Something very similar happened in the case of the Trump vote. The discontent was genuine. The tragedy of the situation was that the left could not properly articulate the discontents of globalization. It was in the very twisted and distorted manner of the right that was able to capture it. And for many of us who still think this is a left campus, also fellow travelers on the left, I would really suggest something we really need to think about. It's been unfortunate, it's been bad at times, perhaps it's going to get worse. But as I said, democracy's redemption, I'm still looking forward to it. Thank you very much.